live. Welcome to Bible.
Hey!
Welcome to Bible
We're
Club
live now. Yeah, welcome back.
Yeah.
Welcome back. Sheila's already in chat. She says, blessings, everyone. Hope y'all are having a wonderful Father's Day, and every day should be Mother's and Father's Day. And I agree with her. It should. It really should.
Thank you, Sheila. Welcome.
Yes, we're glad you're in chat. Hope you've had a wonderful week and so far, and a wonderful weekend, and happy Father's Day to all of our dads, daddies, father-to-be, and moms that have to be dads. So
Unfortunately, a lot of those.
yeah, and that happens sometimes. But hope everyone's had a great holiday today and a great weekend. And I'll just hurry up and do my thing. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe to this channel. Give it a big thumbs up, and please turn on your notification bell so you do not miss any great videos. And please share the video with your friends and family. And let's get started.
So,
Amy was here
Diane.
first. Diane Notion. How was your day?
Hi.
Hello.
Very hot here in Minnesota finally.
Did you work on your videos today? Did you
Yeah.
listen to some more things? Okay, yeah, I was just wondering if you had been working on your videos. And
Yeah,
I did talk to your
I'm-
brother, and he said no, everything's fine. He just couldn't get together with you, but he's still up for it. He said. I said, well, you just have to call her, and I don't want to be the middleman, so get in touch with your brother.
So it's been very hot here.
She doesn't want to talk about it. She's like, I don't care. He's your brother. He's our brother.
He's your brother, too.
I talked to your brother today.
Yeah. Our brother. Yeah, it is hot. Yeah. So okay, you're doing your video still. You just have a lot of listening to do.
Yeah, I started the text part. What I did was I went on eSword and looked up false prophets. So I've got all the scriptures that have to do with false prophets. I'm putting it all into text, going through the videos and picking out videos that go with that specific scripture.
Oh, awesome.
It
That's a lot
seems
of
pretty
research.
easy, but it's not so easy.
Yeah, I know.
Because you hear a verse, or you read the verse, and if it says in wolves clothing, then you think, okay, I've got to pick a video piece that goes right with that, even though it's still on false prophets, because false prophets is like huge.
Yeah. So it does take a lot, or you're doing a lot of research for this video, which, take your
I
time.
didn't do as much as I thought I did. I thought I looked over a lot of videos, and what I did was I was on YouTube, and I saved the videos on YouTube, so if I want to watch them again, I can, so they're not on my computer using up space.
Yeah.
These people are crazy. It shows people outside eating grass.
Well, now.
Okay.
Beware.
I'm looking forward to seeing that video.
Yeah, me too. I look forward to seeing her videos. She puts a lot on.
Yeah, I do too, because God is really working with me. I fasted on Friday.
Yeah, how was it?
And I didn't have any thoughts. I sat in front of my computer. I sat for like 3 or 4 hours and listened to the Bible and prayed. And I thought, well, maybe I'm just not supposed to work on my video today. So I thought, well, I'll try it again on Saturday. So I tried it on Saturday. I was like, I'm not getting anything, no inspiration. And then this morning I sat down and I decided I wasn't going to fast today, maybe for half the day. All of a sudden I got all this inspiration. It's like, I know how I want to do the video now. You gotta figure out a whole format. It's like a book, and you have different chapters. Which chapter do I want to put in first? It's gotta just flow. It just came to me.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Praise
Jody, how's your day, Jody Girl?
It's good. Hey, I just want to do a shout out to Joe and Garrett.
They're on.
ya.
Welcome, Joe and Garrett.
Welcome. I've heard a lot
Yeah,
about both
we've
of
heard
you.
a lot of good things about you guys, and we're so glad you're listening in. We hope you'll stay and actually listen to, listen to
We're
the
on
stream.
part 3 of creation versus evolution, so it's very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. So how was your day, Gertie? Gert.
It was
Yeah, Gert.
good. It was good. A little stressful because I had to deal with a family situation but it was a good situation where I was able to be bold for God and
Yeah.
I heard
and
about
really
Yeah. That's awesome.
it. Yeah.
even though it's
Great
stressful,
job.
it feels good. It feels good. So
Yeah. You got
And
we
thing to
gotta
remember
grow.
is they don't hate you, they hate God.
Yeah.
You're just standing up for God.
Yeah.
It always feels nice
I
to
think
tell
that
the truth.
they hate me right now, but
Yeah, I know
you know.
it feels like that, but
Well,
Yeah.
But you told the truth. And when
Yeah.
you tell the truth will set you free.
yeah.
yeah.
That's right. And that is actually in
That's
the
a quote
Bible.
from Jesus, yeah.
Yeah, that's actually in the Bible. People don't realize that the things that they say actually come out of Scripture.
Sometimes.
But the best part of it is my brother's still speaking to me, so it didn't
Okay.
affect our relationship. I don't think it's affected our relationship.
That's
So
good.
that's
Yeah.
a positive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good.
Awesome.
And we have to grow in the Lord. That's like what Dan and I were talking. We can't just stay stagnant. We can't just be in a certain place and then not go anywhere with it. We have to grow and progress.
Oh yeah. And I've been praying about it because I know there's times when I would listen to the Bible before and
Yeah.
I would listen but not hear. Now I'm hearing. Now I
Absorbing.
yeah.
The first and second time that I read through the entire Bible, the first time I was just listening just to get through it, just to say, I finished it. The second time I started listening a little bit, but now is when I'm actually absorbing it and growing from it. And the more times that you listen or read it, you start remembering verses. And that's like in the Bible where God says we need to hold it in our hearts, Scripture in our hearts. And I've had to refer back to Scripture before, but I never could do that before because I didn't memorize it. I was just listening to it just to get through it.
Right. Yeah.
And I've seen such a change in you lately, especially lately, where you're ready to just take a stand and say, this is how I believe, no matter who goes with me. This is how I believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just keep moving forward.
Oh yeah.
Be very
Definitely.
stubborn when you think that the devil is trying to hold you back. Just
Yeah, be stubborn. Yeah,
push
you're right.
forward.
Oh no, she's got Satan in her, unfortunately. I'll pray for her and I do pray for her, but
Yeah.
that's all we can
Do
do is pray for those people.
Yes, just
Exactly.
keep everything, and don't bend.
We don't hate them.
No, we don't
just
hate them.
want them to understand the truth, and we love
Right.
them enough to tell them the truth, right? So
Yeah.
that we can potentially save their soul.
Yeah. But don't hold it against her. Forgive. Not to okay it, but don't hold bitterness in your heart for her.
Right.
Right.
You can be angry, but not hold bitterness.
Right.
And that's why I always teach, if somebody will listen, as long as they'll listen, we can keep talking to them, keep telling them,
Yeah.
and helping them to understand. But it's when they turn away from us that we just say, okay, goodbye.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Which has happened. That people
Yeah.
turn their backs on us, but we just keep following Christ, no matter what.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah, well, just think when the 144,000 go out amongst the world, we're going to have their help. We'll have 144,000.
maybe not directly.
Not directly, but they'll
No.
see the people too. They'll help.
They're going to be doing the work of Christ, that's for sure. But we don't know if they're going to be centrally located in a certain area or if they're going to be worldwide. We don't really know where they're going to be.
Right.
It doesn't tell us.
Yeah. And if Joe's still on, happy Father's Day.
Yeah. Happy Father's Day.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get started.
Yeah.
Last week, let me share my screen. And so last week we covered, we've talked a lot in the last 2 weeks about, whether evolution is a science or not. And, based on the definition of science, right? Science is knowledge or a system of knowledge covering general truths or the operation of general laws, especially as obtained and tested through scientific method, which evolution does not follow. The only part of that evolution follows is hypothesis. The scientific method requires observation, which we can't do with evolution. Hypothesis is just where you come up with a theory. And then testing and demonstration has also never been able to be done with evolution. So it's purely hypothesis. It's just a theory, and that's all it is. And then we looked at how modern science has actually proven that evolution is actually impossible. We looked at some quotes from Darwin himself, where he even felt that his own theories were impossible and said so, but people choose to believe it anyway.
Have you ever heard this? Billions of years ago, there was an explosion in space. Or 100,000 years ago, this happened or that happened. Or even, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Question, how does anyone know? Was anybody there to observe it? Well, actually somebody was, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Check this out. First of all, we need to recognize that there is a huge difference between observational science and historical science. Both are valuable, but very different. Let's define the two real quick, shall we? Observational science is simply when we observe something and experiment to draw conclusions. It involves repeatable experimentation and observations in the present. It's through observational science that we find cures for diseases and build space shuttles, stuff like that. Now, through historical science, we consider things that happened in the past, but they cannot be checked in the same way. We don't have access to the past like we do the present because, well, it's gone, right? All we really have is speculation, or at best, circumstantial evidences of past events based on what we see in the present. That's not to say that we can't make intelligent guesses about the past, or form reasonable inferences from rocks or fossils in the present, but we certainly cannot directly test our conclusions because we cannot repeat the past. Got it? So, does that mean historical science is unimportant? Not at all. Let's drop an example down here for a minute and take a look at the Eiffel Tower. That 19th century Parisian monument designed by Gustave Eiffel that stands 1,063 feet tall, which was built as the entrance for the 1889 World's Fair and is still the tallest building in Paris today, visited by millions of people each year? Yeah, that one. Well, guess what? Everything I just told you is true, but how do we test it? Well, applying observational science, we can, of course, observe the Eiffel Tower anytime we're in Paris. It's here in the present. Then, we can continue by testing the height and comparing it to all the other structures in Paris and confirm the claim that it is indeed the tallest building in Paris. But that's the extent of the kind of facts that can be proved by observational science in reference to this claim. How do we really know that Gustave designed it? How do we really know it was built in the 19th century as an entrance to the 1889 World's Fair? How do we really know how many people visited? That's all in the past. It can't be repeated. For that kind of information, we need to go outside the limits of observational science and discover what has been communicated to us through historical documents and eyewitness accounts. And furthermore, we have to believe those eyewitnesses and documents are trustworthy. The same is true when we talk about the origin of the Earth. The Earth is here. We all agree with that. So, does observational science confirm that the world was created by God? And are there trustworthy documents and eyewitness accounts that confirm it? Well, let's take the last part first. In short, what we're really asking is my original question, was anybody there to observe it? The answer is yes. God was there, and he told us how he created. He inspired people to write down his very words that became books that were compiled into a complete book called the Bible, which has been verified over and over again and has demonstrated itself to be totally trustworthy in all it claims and teaches. Even secular scholars will concede that the Bible accurately records historical events. Anyway, we have the most trustworthy revelation from the most trustworthy eyewitness. Now, what about observational science? Does it confirm the Bible? Yes. And what's extremely important to realize is the observable fact that the universe is logical and orderly. That makes sense only if its creator is logical and has imposed order on his creation. It doesn't make sense at all if the universe is just an accident of a huge explosion. Also, our minds are able to comprehend many things about the universe, and that's only possible if the creator of the mind gave us the ability and desire to explore the universe. It doesn't make sense if our brains are byproducts of chance because we couldn't trust their conclusions to ever be accurate. And lastly, it only makes sense that we can observe and repeat an experiment if the universe consistently obeys the same laws from day to day, which only makes sense if a lawgiver created it that way and upholds it. So to be bluntly honest, science itself, whether observational or historical, is only possible because God exists and the Bible is true. I could go on, but enough said.
Yeah.
We looked at how old the Earth is. We looked at some of the things that people thought took millions of years, and it takes a relatively short period of time. We looked at the geologic column, which does not exist anywhere in the world. We looked at polystrate trees. I'm just kind of doing a quick recap. If you hadn't seen the first two videos, just go back and on my channel, and you can watch the Sunday night, the last two Sundays, and catch up. Or you can just go to my website and read up on it, because I'm just basically going through my documents there. So it's BibleProphecyandTruth.com, and then the Creation versus Evolution series that I'm going through. So we've looked at a lot of things so far. We've looked at, how the Earth's rotation, the spinning of the Earth was actually slowing down. We've looked at how they found things frozen in the ice, healthy animals standing on their feet, food in their mouths, and things like that. We looked at, what carbon dating really is, and how scientists themselves say that carbon dating really can't be relied on because we're making many assumptions, and it depends on the environment that the artifact lies in that greatly affects the C14 leaching level, is what happens to it, especially if it's in saline water. So there's a lot of things we've looked at so far. We looked at how there's the delta in the Gulf of Mexico and the Mississippi River dumping all that silt in, 80,000 tons of mud per hour. And they measured that, and it's been doing it for about 4,400 years ago. So 4,400 years ago, something happened that changed the world. The magnetic poles took 6 violent swings about 4,000 years ago. Bristlecone pine trees are the oldest living trees in the world, and the oldest are around 4,000 years old. So 4,000 years ago, something happened. The science data shows us this. And we know what happened 4,400 years ago. It was the flood of Genesis, when God flooded the world. And then we've looked at kind of what dinosaurs are, where basically the word dinosaur didn't even exist until the 1800s, and it's just the Greek for Dinosaurs, which is terrifying lizard. And we looked at how reptiles, no matter how old they are, never stop growing. And we've looked at some of the old artifacts, like, if dinosaurs never existed and died off 65 million years ago, then mankind would have never known about them. Would have never even heard of them. But there's all kinds of ancient cultures that have dinosaur drawings, dinosaur artifacts, dinosaur legends, dragon legends, all kinds of things. And so we've looked at all of these things. We've looked at a lot of the science data. We've looked at like trilobites and graptolites that are supposed to be an index fossil that show, 500 billion years or 500 million years ago. If they find a fossil with a trilobite fossil in it, that they say, well, that means that it's 500 million years old. But they found living graptolites, and they've found modern material with trilobite fossils in it. So it proves that it's completely wrong. It can't be relied upon at all. Then we looked at what the Bible says about creation. We looked at what the creation account it says itself. And then we looked at what one of my favorite parts is the firmament, and what the Bible tells us about the firmament, how there's layers of firmament, how there's waters above and waters below at the creation, which is what a lot of people don't really understand, is that the creation actually shows us that there are multiple layers to the firmament, that there's multiple layers of waters at the creation. And so when we look at the world that existed before the flood, it was very much a greenhouse type of environment, where the world itself was a completely different place. There was a seventh layer to the atmosphere that doesn't exist today, that created a canopy, and it was a pole to pole tropical planet. There were no ice caps. You didn't have rain. The Bible actually tells us that there was no rain on the earth, that the earth was watered from a mist that came up from the ground, and it was all groundwater that watered everything. There was no rain prior to that. And when God flooded the earth, he opened the windows of heaven. And it rained down on the earth for 40 solid days. And then the fountains of the great deep were broken up. And so the hot, scalding water from the earth, from under the earth's crust, came gushing up, and the rain fell. The super cold of space came with it, and it caused a massive, massive storm, that something like we've never seen, I'm sure, and caused the ice caps. Because that's one thing we're going to look at today, is that ice at 300 degrees below zero becomes magnetic. A lot of people don't know that. I never knew it until I studied this out. It's ice at 300 degrees below zero becomes magnetic. And so when the super cold of space came down, with the water coming down from the windows of heaven when God opened them, and it brought that super cold in, that's why we have animals that were frozen in stride. Instead of, if something were to freeze to death, it will fall down first before it freezes to death, right? It'll get numb. It won't be able to move. It'll fall over. But we found animals that are frozen standing up, actually in stride, like they were moving at the time. And in order for that to happen, it has to be at least 300 degrees below zero for it to happen that fast, for something to freeze that quickly. And so we're going to look at that a little bit more, because when the super cold of space came down with all that water and froze it, and it became magnetic, it aligned over the poles, because that ice was magnetic and it aligned over the poles of the planet. And that's why we have we have 6 violent swings that the magnetic poles took 4,000 years ago, because that's what happened, is that ice tried to gravitate, so it caused a major shift in the gravitational field. And we see that evidence today. And then we also looked at this, where this amber, this fossilized tree sap, actually has 50% more oxygen than what we have in our atmosphere today, which proves that there was higher oxygen levels. There would have been a higher atmospheric pressure, which is exactly what they use today in hyperbaric chambers, which is called pressurized oxygen therapy, and you heal twice as fast. The environment before the flood was the whole world was a pole-to-pole tropical planet that was a hyperbaric chamber, in a sense, where it was higher atmospheric pressure and higher oxygen levels, which allowed things to grow much faster. They've done a lot of testing in hyperbaric chambers with science these days, and animals will grow. The growth rate is greatly accelerated, heal a lot faster, get a lot bigger, and that's the way it was before the flood. That's why people lived for hundreds of years, because the environment was perfect for that. And that's why after the flood, remember we talked about how after the flood, people's lifespans initially were still in the 300-400 year range, but then in the second and third generations it dropped off dramatically, and that's because the conditions on the earth were dramatically changed after the flood, because that layer of protective water, which would have been ice until God melted it and caused it to rain down on the earth, that layer is gone, so it's no longer a greenhouse. And that's why ever since then the ice has been melting, and we're going to look at that a little more today. So we looked at a lot of pictures. I did a real quick recap because I know we have some new people with us today. But so today we're going to look at the dinosaurs that are actually mentioned in the Bible. And I say dinosaur just because that's what we recognize these big, huge reptiles as, right? And that's the thing is, when man was living for several hundred years before the flood, well, so were animals. And so reptiles never stop growing as long as they're alive. We can see that today. Reptiles never stop growing as long as they're alive. And so reptiles that were 300-400 years old were huge, which is where these big, huge bones came from. That's why the first dinosaur bone ever found was an iguanodon bone, because it looks exactly like an iguana bone that we have today. It's just a lot bigger. And it's just because it was a very old iguana. It's so simple. It's almost silly. It's so simple where they came from. But there's a couple places in the Bible, in Job, where God actually talks about these creatures. One's called a behemoth and one's called a leviathan. And the behemoth is, people like to say that, well, this is just an elephant. But let's look at what the behemoth is. His strength is in his loins, and his force in the navel of his belly. He moveth his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. His bones are as strong as pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. He's the chief of the ways of God. This is a big, huge, large creature with a big tail, like a tree, right? Moveth his tail like a cedar. And if you've ever seen an elephant, you know that elephants have tiny little tails.
You're not late, pessimistic. Glad you're here.
Hey, good to see you. Glad you're back.
Good to
You're
see
not
you.
too late. We just got started a little bit ago.
No.
So this is definitely not an elephant. It has a big, huge tail, and it says that his force is in the navel of his belly. He's got a big, huge body, and it's a large creature. And notice it says, "Behold now, Behemoth, which I made with thee." This is something that God made at the same time he made man. Same time he made everything. It's not something that he made 65 million years ago and then created man. He made it at the same time. And like we talked about before, when Noah brought these creatures on the ark with him, he just brought small ones. He brought very young ones that were still small. He didn't bring a 500-year-old reptile. Right. Because it was too big. He brought a very young one. And so that just makes that an easy question to answer.
Well, I have a question. So when did these animals become extinct?
Well, there's been a lot of animals that have become extinct over recent years.
And maybe
some of these reptiles have died off. A lot of them still live. They just don't get as big anymore.
Because of that atmospheric.
Right, the conditions on the earth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's some of the different species died off and have become extinct over time, but there's still a lot of them that still live today, and they just don't get as large. And one of the things we're going to talk about is some of the like for example, the next one that God talks about is an actual fire-breathing dragon, right? By his neesings a light doth shine, his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. This is a fire-breathing dragon.
Yeah. Sounds like it to
That
me.
God's talking about in Job. and that's one of the things, it's this big, he raises himself up and the mighty are afraid. This is something that's very fearful, like a T-Rex, would have been if it was breathing, a fire-breathing huge reptile, right?
Yeah.
And that's, God talks about it like it's this big, fearful creature, which it would have been, obviously. But here's the thing that people don't know today is that there's a thing called a bombardier beetle that actually has chambers in its body where it has two different chemicals, and it actually combines those chemicals, which are released at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, which basically is shooting fire out of their rear end, right? So, and they use this when they're being chased, and it's used to discourage the predator that's trying to catch them. It shoots fire out of its butt.
Dang.
Yeah.
Where are they? Where are they located?
I don't remember where they live.
Probably in the West Indies.
West Indies.
I don't remember where they're found today, but they are found. They're actually a living thing that still exists today. And then here's the thing too, is there's a lot of head bones of dinosaurs that they found that have like these passages, these chambers in their bones, where it was, we can't prove it, of course, because we don't have them alive today to show the actual biological functions, but these chambers actually give them the ability to have chemicals that they could mix and then actually breathe it out of their mouths.
Pessimistic said they don't get large anymore because of what atmospheric thing? This is what I said, this atmospheric thing. I remember seeing a theory somewhere about a canopy being over or around Earth that got removed in the flood. Are you referring to this?
Yes, I am.
Yes, sir.
Actually, and we talked about that in last week's live stream last Sunday.
Yeah, he was here.
And you can go back and review.
He was here.
Last week's, because we did talk about the canopy.
I think he was here.
And we talked about, I don't know if he was here Sunday. I think he was here Wednesday. So I think you missed last Sunday. But when we look at I'll just go back and show you. It's chapter 25 on my website, and I talk about the layers that existed in the creation that God talks about. And it talks about the waters above and the waters below, and several different layers and expanses and overlays. And that's what we actually see in the creation. And then when God opened the windows of heaven, there's a canopy, right, that would have created a greenhouse effect on the earth, which created a pressurized oxygen therapy environment. It was a totally different world before the flood. And so I'm not going to go back through the whole thing, but you're welcome to go and review that from last Sunday. And you can also look on my website where I've got all that information. But the main thing is that, like, what we have found in fossilized tree sap is that the oxygen level in the air bubbles in the fossilized tree sap is actually 50% higher oxygen content than we have today, which those little air bubbles in the fossilized tree sap would have preserved that air from the time.
Thanks.
Yeah. And so, yes, we are definitely talking about a canopy. Oh.
Thanks. Thanks.
I think that was just a fact.
It is.
But yes, so before the flood, it was a much different environment. And one of the things I'd like to point out too is, I have it here. It's a quote from the book of Enoch, where Enoch actually prophesied of the flood. When you read that, and he actually talks about he said, when I raised mine eyes toward heaven and saw a lofty roof with 7 water torrents thereon. He's actually, in the prophecy of the flood, he's actually saying that he looked up and saw water above, which is, to me, that's just like, wow. Yeah, that really confirms the canopy in a big way. So yeah, definitely go back and follow up on that, because it's really interesting. And when you read what the Bible actually says about it, and how there's multiple layers, and actually waters above and waters below, that's like, well, if you look at the world today, there's no waters above, right? I mean, we got rain clouds, but we're not talking about rain clouds. We're talking about water, right? And that was the 7th layer. We have 6 layers to our atmosphere right now, and that was the 7th layer. Was that it's a protective shield, basically, that created a greenhouse effect, and would also protected the earth from asteroids and things like that. Nothing would have gotten through that big thick layer of ice. So there's a lot to that. It's very interesting to study out, that's for sure. So God shows us a fire-breathing dragon. He shows us the long neck, which he calls a behemoth. And if you remember the Mokele Membe from the Likovia swamp in Africa, where the pygmy tribes in Africa, when they saw a picture of a long neck dinosaur, they said, "Oh, that's a Mokele Membe." And they don't get as big because they don't live very long.
You have your accent.
I don't even know if that's the right accent or not.
From Africa.
Like, I have no idea. The local African dialect, they sound like that. I'm just kidding. I have no idea. I'm faking it. I'm sure it has an accent. I don't know what it is. But it's a Mokele Membe. It's kind of how it's pronounced. And it's because they actually recognized the creature. It was a long-necked dinosaur. And the people that were showing him the picture were amazed. What do you mean? These things are alive? And it's a 50,000 square mile swamp. And if you notice, the behemoth lies under the shady trees and the covert of the reed and the fens. And the fens is swamps. So this creature, this behemoth, lives in the swamps. And it lives in a 50,000 square mile swamp in Africa. And they've seen it. They killed it. They killed one once, and everybody that ate the meat died, so they no longer hunt them. And they just
they got really sick.
Yeah. So it's really interesting stuff when you really research these things. And this is the stuff that you'll never learn in your textbook at school. You'll never learn this from mainstream media, mainstream books, anything that's.
Because they're not going to prove creation. They want to prove evolution.
Right, because there has to be an alternative. If you don't want to believe in God, there's got to be something. Like, where did we come from, right? So this is what, even, we looked at some quotes from Darwin himself where he said that his theories don't really cut the mustard, but everybody has taken Darwin's theories and run with them because it's an alternative to God. And it's something that we can say, oh, this is where we came from. Because people don't want to believe in God.
No.
So they'll take a theory that is actually impossible, that modern science has proved impossible, that the creator of the theory says is not likely, and we're going to make that something that we teach as a fact these days. That's so.
And then we wonder why people are so confused all the time, because they're not getting the truth. They're getting twisted garbage, and they don't know what to think.
Yeah.
And you hear stuff like this, and it really makes one's faith in science really diminish a lot, right?
But they don't teach this stuff in church. They're not going to get it in church. They're not going to get it in school. They're not going to get it in church.
Nowadays, that even in churches, there's a lot of churches that teach between verse 1 and verse 2 of Genesis that there's billions of years.
Well, okay.
That God just started it all up.
We weren't taught that, but we were never
taught
taught
you and I were
any
never
of
taught
this
that, but they do teach that in modern churches, in some churches. They teach that evolution fits in the Bible, and it doesn't. We looked at that last week, where evolution does not fit in the Bible.
Sheila says she agrees. She says,
awesome.
Agree. Yeah.
So, where was I?
Oh, you were talking about
the fire-breathing dragons, and the Makele Membe, and the dinosaurs that are in the Bible. And even after, and the thing about Job, I'll just finish up with this, because Job, the book of Job, in the lifetime of Job, almost everyone agrees that it had to be around the time of Abraham. It was somewhere around the lifetime of Abraham that Job happened. And so it would have been like 300 years after the flood, which, you remember, the lifespans of men were still in the hundreds of years in the first generation after the flood. And it's only second and third generations where it started to diminish greatly. And by the fourth, fifth, it was down to 100, 150 years. And so the dinosaurs, the reptiles that were on the ark, the baby ones, the young ones, after the flood, started having babies, and they would have lived for a long time. They would have lived a couple hundred years, because that immediately after the flood, the lifespans of living beings was a lot greater than it is now. It's just that immediately after the flood, within a couple of generations, the effects of not having the canopy there began to corrupt the earth. And that's why in Hosea it says that, the earth is mourning. The animals are dying, the fish are dying, the birds are dying. And it's all because of sin.
Turn to the Polish-German border, where authorities are rushing to identify the cause of a large amount of fish to die in what Germany's environment minister says is likely to be an environmental catastrophe. Tons of fish have been washed up along hundreds of kilometers of the river Odra. Both countries believe a toxic substance is to blame, but have yet to identify it. Well, Katarzyna Koizar is a correspondent from the Polish investigative journalism website Oko Press. She says other animals are also affected.
It's really serious. We know about thousands of dead fish, as well as beavers and birds. We don't know yet if the contamination does any harm to humans as well. But it's forbidden right now to even get close to the river, to swim in it. We also have some reports about dogs who are swimming in the river in Wrocław. It's one of the biggest cities near the Odra River. So the dogs are right now having some major health issues. So we know that it's serious, but as you said, we don't know what it is. It started 2 weeks ago in the end of July, and we still don't have any answers about the substance and about the source of this substance.
Katarzyna Koza, where questions are being asked over that contamination of the Odra River.
It's because of man's murders, adulteries, all the sin, the wickedness of man has caused all of the corruption that's in the earth. That's why the earth is mostly, if you look at the earth now, it's 70% water, which it wouldn't have been before the flood. The seas were much smaller, and there was a lot more land. There was no ice, so it was a lush tropical planet, pole to pole, before the flood. And now there's deserts. There's that, even in the tropics, right here in Florida, we live in the tropics, and the trees are dying.
Yeah, it's true.
The trees are literally dying all over the place, and it's just, the world is dying.
Welcome back. There are so many dead and decaying trees in Stockton, new data shows is making the temperatures feel up to 3 degrees hotter in certain parts of the city.
CBS 13 Steve Large is live for us in Stockton tonight with the tree troubles and why the city hasn't been able to replace them. Steve.
And I'm live in this Stockton Park where it wasn't hard to find a few dead trees on the grounds here. In fact, Stockton is in the middle of a citywide tree audit rooted in finding a solution to this problem. They are the sounds of summer in Stockton. Only on hot days. Little League coach Stefan Garibay says playing on this baseball field is no dream.
Well, our trees have been dying.
It's more like a nightmare.
Last year we had a girl pass out while she was practicing for All-Stars.
Dead trees surrounding this diamond have made some sweltering summer days unbearable.
Without trees, without shade, you're just playing in an open desert.
Stockton's tree trouble is now the subject of a citywide audit. The study, still underway, showing neighborhoods in South Stockton have so few healthy trees, they're leaving some communities feeling hotter than others by as many as 3 degrees.
I was surprised.
Max Vargas is the Stockton mayor's senior policy advisor.
As we all know, when we're at 107, we hit 110 on one of our hottest summers. That's a big difference.
Stockton's trees have suffered not only from drought years, but the city's bankruptcy years. No money for maintenance. The tree audit shows the neighborhoods in the most need of new trees are in some of its lowest income communities.
Now that we have data, now that we actually have metrics that we can point to, how do we make it so that folks across Stockton can have the better air quality, same temperatures even.
Last year, a donation of free trees was even turned away because the city couldn't afford to care for them once they were planted. Dying trees and the search for a dire solution in Stockton.
We're out here, we're playing, and these kids are playing in 100, 110 degrees. We don't have shade on half our fields.
Tree trouble here has become a hot topic. The citywide tree audit is set to be finished by the end of the summer and presented to the city council, who will try to seek some type of solution.
Yeah, it's too bad. They need that shade, especially now. Steve, thank you.
And it's because of sin. It's a direct result of sin. So, I wanted to point that out because Job would have been around that time, and he could have actually, when God said, "Behold now Behemoth," he was telling Job, see Behemoth, right? Which is, Job was probably looking at a large, long-necked dinosaur, and God pointed him out to him because it would have existed then. So, and then one last thing, modern science, they're finding that they find these artifacts. There's what's the word I'm looking for? Fossils. Thank you very much. Sorry, slipped my mind. They find fossils, and they found that when they find a fossil where they can actually distinguish the skin, they're saying, "Wow, it looks remarkably like that of some modern lizards." And I'm like, duh. It looks remarkably like that of modern lizards because
I wonder why.
They are just big lizards. That's all they are.
Yeah.
They're just much older. Yeah. And like I said last time, if you haven't seen this video on living dinosaurs, it's really interesting how they've captured some modern dinosaurs that appear to be alive today, even though they should have, supposedly died off 65 million years ago. But I'm going to move on from that. And like I always say, if you have questions, just ping me. You can write me on my website or send me an email at prophecyandtruth@gmail.com, or send me a comment on YouTube, whatever, and I'd be happy to talk with anybody who has more questions. But I want to talk about this because we've alluded to a lot of these things over the last couple of weeks, where we've talked about the canopy, we've talked about the ice sheets and where they came from, and then so let's talk a little more about that. What happened at the flood? Because it changed a lot of things on the earth. And then I think I showed this to you before, where they found the mammoth was overwhelmed suddenly with a rapid deep freeze and instant death because it had unchewed bean pods still in between its teeth and preserved stomach contents, and saber-toothed tiger in a 90-foot plum tree with green leaves and ripe fruit. I mean, these are things they found deep in the ice in the Arctic. It's absolutely fascinating. Mm-hmm. And it's not something that's just a singular event, right? They have found these things all over the Arctic, both the North and the South poles, where there's ripe trees and plants and animals that just froze suddenly.
Yeah.
It's not just a one-time thing that they found. And like I said, it can't be just with a little snowstorm. For an animal to be frozen in stride while running or with food in their mouth, the temperature had to be like 300 degrees below zero for it to super freeze that fast.
The evidence that the global flood brought on the Ice Age is abundant. One such example is rapid freezing. Reports describe the apparent near-instant freezing of a flowing river found buried in the frozen ground with fish frozen in place. Rivers do not freeze instantly, they freeze from the top down. The ice insulates the flowing water below, which prevents complete freezing. Here's another great report. 50 oxen were found, trapped in a remote frozen river. They were found attempting to cross when the river froze instantly. It froze them in place, alive, and they were unable to escape. How could a river freeze so quickly that a large, powerful animal could not exit in time? An entire herd of them. And what were they running from? Other findings in the Arctic also indicate rapid freezing. You see, it was a lush, temperate region, not a frozen wasteland from an ice age that was lasting thousands of years. The evidence for this is everywhere. Barren Axel Heiberg Island and Ellesmere Islands have been discovered to harbor a vast array of temperate animals and vegetation, which are now buried under the snow. Note that some animals recovered are burrowing animals that could not dig into rock-hard permafrost. Others are cold-blooded. Large trees were also found. Even more recently, giant camels have been found up in the north as well.
And that's the thing, when the windows of heaven were opened, when God flooded the world, the super cold of space is measurable at 459.6 degrees below zero. And I say that with a caveat that there really is no such thing as cold, because what it really is the absence of heat. Cold doesn't exist. It's just no heat. And so no heat, complete no heat, is 459.6 degrees below zero in our way of measuring temperature, right? But when that super cold of space came down to the earth, and then hot scalding water from the fountains of the great deep was broken up, it was a huge storm, and it created this big cone of cold that was sucked down into the atmosphere that caused this freezing and this instant freezing, and it caused the ice to become magnetic, that I was talking about, where it then went and tried to align over the poles, which caused some major upheavals in the poles of the planet. And when we look at the evidence in the Earth, this is a representation of what we see on the Earth, where we know the ice sheets used to come down to, right? Because it used to come all the way down to Kansas City in North America, the ice sheets. And there's a couple different examples of, different types of animals that have been found. And this is a good one because it shows all the evidence of where the ice used to be as it has receded. And that's the thing is, this whole thing about global warming is actually, there's actual, a scientific basis for that. And the reason for it is that the ice has been melting for 4,400 years. Ever since the flood, when those ice sheets came down that far into the continents, the ice has been melting ever since. And that's why we have, the ocean levels have risen greatly. They've found cities, entire cities on the edges of the ocean that are just now completely buried underwater. I like this picture here because this shows the land masses of the Earth prior to the ice melting, where actually all of the continents were connected by landmass. And that's why all of the animals and peoples of the world migrated before the ocean levels rose too far and actually separated the land masses where they could no longer get to the other side. And so that's why, after the flood, everything came out of the ark, right? And the peoples even started at that same place, but everything migrated across the earth and they simply walked there. There wasn't any, didn't require boats. It didn't require transport across the water, because when the ice was thicker and spread further across the world, they just simply walked across the land masses into the other continents. And now that the ice is melted, there's not nearly as much, now that the ice is melted, the land masses are no longer connected. Like this is showing Florida today, and this is what the area of land used to be exposed in fairly recent years. That's how it's like Florida was this area, this spit of land that we call Florida today, was twice as big. Not that long ago. And then this is projected, and there's like I said, there is truth to that. The only thing is, they're trying to say that global warming was caused by man. Well, it was sin, it was the flood. But our carbon emissions and things like that have nothing to do with it. The ice has been melting for 4,400 years, and it's continuing to melt. And that's, like, for example, I've got one here.
People just...
I'll have to get to it when I get to it.
Mankind thinks they're just so bigger than what they really are. Saying that it's mankind that is causing this and controls the weather, and
I know.
They're not that not that big.
That's the thing,
Really
is I've heard conspiracy theories about how the Jews especially are supposed to be manipulating the weather.
I know, I
It's
heard
like,
that.
do you really think that they have the ability to do that? Do you really
Everybody
think
needs
that?
to just
And it's
sit
like,
down.
the vaccines have, nano technology in them that they're getting ready to activate with 5G technology, and they're gonna take control of our bodies. It's like, do you really think that's possible? I mean,
You're getting sucked into a lot of nonsense.
The thing is, there's a lot of conspiracy theories that are based on fact. There really is some truth to some of this, but then they go way, way too far. And we don't even have the technology to do this. We're just barely getting into nanotechnology. We don't have nanotechnology that's able to infiltrate a human body and take over someone's brain. No, we don't have that technology. It is not possible.
The aliens will help us.
Yeah, right.
Dame tu cosita, dame tu cosita, ay, dame tu cosita, dame tu cosita, ay, dame tu cosita, dame tu cosita, ay, dame tu cosita, muévete para aquí, muévete para allá, dame tu cosita, ay, toma, cosita, dame tu cosita, ay, toma, cosita.
Oh man, it's just crazy what some people come up with. But when you don't have God, it's you can really imagine on all the
Sure
things.
can.
I mean that's what,
Imagination.
when I was an atheist and I was trying to make evolution fit in my mind, I imagined all kinds of scenarios of how it could have worked. Because that's what I wanted to believe, and I tried to make it all fit, even though I never could make it fit. I mean, it just never worked. I kept trying, but it was impossible, because it literally is impossible. But this is what I wanted to show you a second ago. I was looking for this picture because the greenhouse effect, the greenhouse gas methane, the vast majority of methane in our atmosphere is produced by the jungles, not by cows farting, not by our vehicle emissions, by the jungles. And it's just part of nature. We're not doing, nothing we are doing is affecting the planet in any way, other than we're destroying it. We don't care about it. We're just dumping all our garbage and our chemicals and everything into the earth, and we're disrespecting it big time, but we are not causing the planet to change. The planet is changing because of the flood, because of the receding ice, and because of what happened and the changes in the world because of sin. Exactly. So, and that's, the sun creates ozone, and the ozone is thinner in the poles because guess what? The sun is not as strong in the poles. So, I mean, it's really simple. The stuff that they try to say, we're creating this hole in the ozone. No, the ozone is thinner in the poles because the sun's light is not as strong there. It's not, it doesn't, it's crazy how they try to say, well, it's mankind's fault. And it really, why they're doing that. They're doing that because they're trying to establish control. They're trying to take these things and make us believe them so that we'll allow them to do what they want to do. Just like this whole, thing with this crazy pandemic and that stupid thing that they tried to force on everybody,
Yeah.
It's all about control. It has nothing to do with science or facts. It's all about them wanting to establish control. And they're trying to do it any way they can. But there's lots of evidence in the earth. I was showing you this, this picture, and that there's tons and tons and tons of evidence in the earth that the ocean levels were much shallower than they are now. Like this is one of the lost cities buried under the ocean, right? There's a lot of those. It's not just a single occurrence, just like there's not just a single occurrence of finding things in the ice that are baffling. And it really, and when I say baffling, it's not baffling to me because I understand exactly what happened, because all of the scientific facts in the earth that we find today, what they do is prove the flood of Genesis. Everything that we find in the earth proves the flood of Genesis. Like we talked about these buried forests that are found all over the earth. Just entire buried forests. It was quick, huge changes in the earth that just buried these forests all of a sudden. And you find them all over the place. A couple 100 feet below the surface of the earth, there's buried forests down there. It's like, how did all these things happen? Well, remember this huge storm that happened, and the earth's crust folding over, massive changes everywhere on the planet from this event. Like they, for example, they also find, like here's a mammoth right in Texas. That's, you're not supposed to be able to find them there, right? But there's evidence of mass boneyards all over the earth, like these, where they're just jumbles of all kinds of bones of different kinds of animals. And they're not just like one kind of animal. They're like all kinds of animals in these mass graves.
Yeah.
And it's
crazy.
It's
jumbled.
It's because it's like if you have a yard that got flooded, you would notice all of the debris would float and go over to the edges as it receded, and then the debris would stay on the sides on the top. And like branches and things, if there was a storm and a flood, the branches would kind of all clump together as they're getting moved and tossed around in the water, and they clump together and then stay in that clump when the water recedes. Well, that's what happened here at the flood. They clumped together, and the really interesting thing is, if you research this, you'll find that the tops of every mountain chain has seashells on them. Every mountain chain in the world has seashells on the tops of the mountains.
Yeah.
So how did they get there?
It can't be explained. Right.
Yeah.
What, Jody?
No, I just said right. How can you explain that
other than the flood of Genesis?
That's right.
Is exactly what happened, because the tops, it tells us in the Bible that the tops of the mountains were covered. Good. So there's so much evidence in the earth. And then, I know I'm kind of skipping around. I've kind of showed you all of these pictures. Here's some that I haven't showed you yet. I showed you the ice sheets, but there's all kinds of, and this is rock, mind you.
Yeah.
This is rock that's been bent and folded. And it didn't happen over a long period of time. This is solid rock. This is not layering, right? This happened quickly. And it's the same thing when you fire a clay pot, in a kiln, right? You take that malleable clay and you turn it to stone. Right. That's what happened at the flood, is that there was this super scalding steam and hot water came gushing out of the ground and fired everything very quickly. There's just some more pictures of the folded rocks in the earth, and it's just because it happened fast, and that's why we have things like this, where you've got tracks that are actually baked into the stone. This is solid rock that has these footprints in it. And it's because it was soft at the time that there was a man and a dinosaur. They say that dinosaurs became extinct 65 million years ago, and that mankind never existed at the same time. It's the same thing that we talked about last week, where we saw all of these artifacts of people that never could have known about dinosaurs creating art of dinosaurs and man riding on a dinosaur, things like that. This is the footprint of a man next to the footprint of a dinosaur, baked into the rock. There's all kinds of evidence all over the earth.
One such track is the Delk track. It was collected in July of 2000 by Alvis Delk, an amateur archaeologist from Stephenville, Texas, who was wandering through the Biloxi. He flipped over a slab which had a pristine fossil dinosaur track on it. He took this home, where it sat in his living room for 8 years. After an accident that left him in the hospital for many months, he needed to pay his bills and clean the slab in hopes he could sell the dinosaur track for a few $100s. This is when he discovered the slab also had a human ichthofossil in it, which was still covered by dried clay.
Now, here's another one where there's a footprint. Actually, you can see the claw prints of this dinosaur.
Oh, yeah.
And then here's the footprint of the man right in the middle of it. Here's the toes. This is the heel over here. Oh, yeah. That's the foot right there. And it's right in the middle of that dinosaur print. There's this, you can see this a little better, where they put it on a t-shirt and you can actually, they highlighted it a little bit. You can see the foot there. Yeah, it's a track of a man crossing a dinosaur track, right? These are things that, obviously they don't tell you about these things when they're teaching you evolution, because this kind of proves the theory wrong, right? If man existed at the same time as dinosaurs, then
if they would have done their research when they were trying to teach you evolution instead of just reading out of a book, then they would find out that it doesn't exist. That creation exists.
It's just, like we talked about, it's not a science. It is not something that you can prove with science. It's more of a faith-based belief system. I believe this happened. There's no science to prove it. It's just what it is.
Pessimistic said, just a thought, I wonder if you know of any experiments where they grow different types of reptiles in high oxygenated pressure chambers to simulate a canopy environment.
Now, I don't know of anything specifically where they've actually raised reptiles in a hyperbaric chamber, but they do a lot of testing and a lot of experiments with hyperbaric chambers and animals being raised inside of that environment. Yes, I don't know about reptiles specifically. I'll have to research that.
What happens to the animal? It grows really fast.
Well, it grows a lot faster. Yeah, the growth rate is greatly increased, and it gets bigger. Yeah.
Well, then it probably would happen with reptiles.
Yeah, and that's
Can you imagine a snake in a bigger realm?
Oh, no.
No, that's okay.
That's something
Or
that's
a
just a
spider.
known fact. I mean, science is something that you can observe, hypothesize, test, and demonstrate, right? Well, science proves to us that reptiles never stop growing. As long as a reptile is alive, it continues to grow. We just know that, it's a fact. So before the flood, when things were living hundreds of years, they just got big. And here's another article about, how these big jumbles of bones, there are all kinds of animals. All, fish, birds, mammoths, men, all kinds of animals that are buried together in these big mass graveyards. And it's because they got clumped together and they're all kind of buried all at the same time.
Yeah.
And then, they try to tell us that petrification takes millions of years, right? For these bones to have become petrified, it took lots and lots of time. But, there's so much evidence now that, this is a petrified bone in a modern boot. It only takes a few years, and it doesn't take a long period of time. It takes the right environment. Because if it's a wet environment, if it's the perfect type environment, something can actually turn to stone in just a couple of years. It doesn't take very long. A prune left in the refrigerator for 1 year turned to stone.
Oh,
petrified prunes in 1 year. Yeah. It doesn't take millions of years. It's like the stalactites and stalagmites we talked about, and how, that 1-inch water pipe was left on for 100 years and it created this huge calcium deposit, right? It's huge. And all the man-made tunnels that they've dug in recent years are developing stalactites and stalagmites already. It happens really fast. Coal is another one. It doesn't take tens of thousands of years, right? It can occur in a year or less that wood can actually turn to coal in a year or less. It all takes the right environment. It doesn't take a lot of time.
It can occur over a few days, that's it.
Yeah. And then, diamonds are supposed to have taken millions of years and tremendous pressure to create. But we can create an indistinguishable diamond where it's just like an actual real diamond. We can make them.
Let's make them.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
the same thing. It doesn't take time. It takes the right environment. And that's there's evidence everywhere, all over the earth, that proves these things. I mean, I'm just showing you some highlights. I'm showing you some things that science has found in the earth. And what it does is all of this evidence that we see on the earth of these ice sheets, the jumbled bones, the bent and shaped rocks, all prove this event happened 4,400 years ago. Just like we know that something happened 4,400 years ago because the oldest trees, the deltas of rivers dumping into oceans, everything proves to us that something happened 4,400 years ago. We know exactly what it was.
Just have to decide to believe it or not.
Yeah, exactly. We can believe it or not. But if you don't believe it, you're going to have to you're going to have to believe garbage like evolution, in order for that you got to have something to believe in. Where did we come from? I mean, you can just say, well, I don't know.
Never. You can
Right?
just believe the Bible.
Well, we do know.
All right. Well, that settles that.
Yeah. Well, God told us. God preserved His word for us for all this time so that we can have it today, so that we can read about everything that happened. 25,000 archaeological digs prove that the Bible is 100% accurate history.
Yeah.
All the evidence in the earth proves that the flood of Genesis happened. There's so much actual evidence that it doesn't even require that much faith, really. If you just believe, then it's just true.
Yeah.
So then, what about Lucy? Because I've heard that so many times I had to write this article, right? Because Lucy is supposed to be this transitional form, right? And remember we quoted Darwin, where Darwin said that in order for his theory to be right, then how come there isn't millions and millions of transitional forms that we find?
I know.
We actually find none.
You're an atheist?
I am definitely an atheist, yes.
Now, why are you an atheist?
Why am I an atheist? Because there is no God.
Atheism assumes that you can disprove the existence of a God, but I'm an atheist.
What Darwin showed in his work on evolution and natural selection is that we don't need to invoke any supernatural force or power to account for the development of life through time on Earth.
The ongoing processes that are observable in today's world.
The canine kind, the coyote, and the domestic dog, and there's the feline kind, which is the cats, the tiger and the kitten, and you've got humankind. So Darwin said there'd be a change of kinds over many years. So could you give me one example of observable evidence of a change of kinds?
So, for instance, the fossil record shows the common ancestors of all carnivores, that cats and dogs were once linked, once united by a common ancestor.
How long ago?
This, I believe, was like 60 million years ago.
The scientific method must be observable and repeatable. So could you give me one piece of observable evidence for Darwinian evolution?
Okay, I would point to, as one great example, is look at the genetics of the stickleback.
What's that?
So stickleback fish are a very interesting collection of species that were recently isolated after the end of the Ice Age.
What did they become?
They're various species of sticklebacks.
They stayed as fish?
Well, of course. Human beings are still fish.
Human beings are fish?
Why, yes, of course they are.
Could you give me an example of Darwinian evolution, not adaptation or speciation, but a change of kinds?
These are changes of kinds.
They're still fish.
They're distinctly different fish.
We have thousands of examples.
Can you give me one?
I can give you thousands.
Just one.
For instance, I would say look at Lenski's experiments with bacteria then.
So what do the bacteria become?
The bacteria are still bacteria, of course.
So that's not Darwinian evolution. That's not a change of kinds, is it?
It is a change. It is a change in the genetic makeup of the bacteria, which is
still bacteria. So what do the bacteria become?
A new kind of bacterium.
So it's still bacteria. There's no change of kinds. To summarize, the observable evidence that you give me for Darwinian evolution is bacteria becoming bacteria.
No, it is bacteria acquiring new metabolic capabilities.
You said before that there is lots of evidence for evolution. I just want one observable evidence for Darwinian evolution.
No,
just one.
But I gave you some. You don't want.
Not some. I want one.
Wait, you don't want that.
I want one. Yes, I do. I'm pleading with people.
You asked me to tell you. You asked me to tell you when I've watched one species evolve into another. Isn't that right?
No, one kind into another. There's 14 different definitions of species. So I want a change of kind.
When you're talking about kinds or change in families, you're actually talking about macroevolution. You're talking about changes on the level that separate, say, cats from dogs.
So could you give me any examples of Darwinian evolution?
Well, when you say examples of that, then you have to sort of look at over a longer time frame.
When you say change of kinds, you mean the evolution of one species from another or to another? Yes, we have that in action actually in the Galapagos.
Could you give me one instance?
Yes, we have an example from a group of birds called Darwin's finches.
What do the finches become?
They become genetically new and anatomically new, recognizably different species.
So they're still finches?
Well, of course they're still finches, yes.
So they're not there's no change of kind. Darwin spoke of a change of kind. Can you think of any observable evidence for Darwinian evolution where there's a change of kind?
Change of kind. Change of kind. I'm gonna have to think about that one a little longer.
You give me anything that I can see, observe, and test, which is a scientific method for Darwinian evolution, a change of kinds.
Test and observe.
Could you give me observable evidence, which is a scientific method for Darwinian evolution, a change of kinds?
Okay, I gotta think about it. So you want the evidence of it?
I would say I cannot, I think. It's a hard question, actually. Mitochondrial DNA. So, can you repeat the question again?
Could you give me any observable evidence, just one, for Darwinian evolution?
Let me think about that for a sec.
Observable evidence, something where we don't have to exercise faith. Something that can be observed, like the scientific process, observable.
That's a good question. That one I'm not quite sure.
So you can't think of any observable evidence for evolution?
No.
How do you know it's true?
I'm not sure.
So Darwinian evolution is not observable, it's not scientific.
I guess so.
So it's unscientific, you can't prove it.
It's scientific, actually. You could prove it. It could be proven, just...
Do it for me.
That's hard. That's just too broad of a...
It's unobservable, that's why you need millions of years.
Yes, exactly.
You're trusting the biology majors and the biology professors know what they're talking about, and they can't even give me evidence of a change of kinds.
Well, then there isn't one. If they don't give it, then I wouldn't say there was.
We found zero transitional forms of anything evolving into anything else. Well, they came up with this monkey a few years back, where this Lucy was supposed to be a transitional form. Well, they say it's an ape man because the femur has an angle to it, and ground-dwelling monkeys have a straight femur. So here's a transitional form. Well, guess what? Humans, and they say it's transitioning to a human because humans have an angle to the femur, right? But what they don't tell you is that tree-dwelling monkeys have an angle to the femur. And they found the leg bones of Lucy 1.5 miles away in a different layer than the head and the other bones. And they put them together. and said, here's your transitional form. It just, I mean, I don't even have to say anything else about that, do I? I mean, that's just, they want it to be true so badly.
They're grasping at straws.
They're just trying to make it happen.
Yeah. Because they don't want to believe in God.
Right. And that's the last thing we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Why do men believe in evolution?
Mm-hmm.
Just a couple of things real quick. They found all these head, skulls that they say, well, look, it has a very shallow forehead. This is a, whatever, an ape man, right? Well, there's all kinds of, men alive today that have those kinds of shaped skulls that are alive right now. They're not some ancient, transitional human stage. They're just different people. It's just, there's this idea that there's so much difference between like black people and white people. Well, human DNA in all human beings is 99.9% alike.
Yeah.
I hear this one a lot. How can there be so many races in the world if we are all descendants of Adam and Eve? Well, check this out. First off, let's talk about the word race. Sometimes when people use the word, they mean supposed races of people who have evolved at different times, rates, and in different locations. That's not true. Of course, the word race is also a term we use to distinguish between groups with different physical traits, namely skin color. But are there really different races? Take a gander at Acts 17:26, where it is written that God, from one man, made every nation of men. It's clear then that the Bible teaches that there is one race, the human race. The Bible is also clear that all people on the earth are descendants of Adam and Eve who were created by God. Check Genesis 1:26 through 28. Easy enough. God created two people in his image, male and female, and told them to increase in number. So, Adam and Eve are mom and dad of the human race. Then, their children had children, and those children had children, and so on and so forth for many generations until, according to Genesis 6:9, the world's population was reduced to 8 people who were protected inside an ark during a global flood. And those 8 people later walked off the ark, and according to Genesis 9:19, from them came the people who were scattered over the earth. Oh, wait a second. What do I mean scattered? Well, jump over to Genesis 11 and let's talk about an event known as the Tower of Babel. Basically, because of the sinful actions of the descendants of Noah, the Lord confused their language and scattered them from there over all the earth. That's pretty clear and concise. Okay, so we've got lots of people who are descendants of the 8 folks who came off the ark, and now they have been scattered all over the earth. That explains that we are still one race and that different groups of people ended up in different locations. But how do we get a bunch of different colored people if we are all one race? Well, follow along. This, of course, is a simplified explanation, but the basic principles are true. We all have a pigment in our bodies called melanin, which, depending on different variables, produces different shades of the one main skin color we all possess. Several genes control the amount of melanin produced and thus the variability in the skin shade. In fact, it's easy for one couple to produce a wide range of skin shade variability in just one generation, as we'll see in just a moment. Time for a quick genetics lesson. DNA is the molecule of heredity that is passed from parents to children. A child inherits 23 chromosomes from each parent. Each chromosome pair contains hundreds of genes, which regulate the physical development of the child. However, to illustrate basic genetic principles pertaining to the topic, we'll just talk about 2 genes, the genes that control the production of melanin. So, let capital A and capital B symbolize versions of the gene that code for large amounts of melanin, while little a and little b code for small amounts. Got it? Easy. Check this out. Take a look at the upper left. Let's say dad contributes capital A, capital B genes, and mom contributes capital A, capital B genes as well. Together, they will produce a child with capital A, capital B, and capital B. This is a kid with a lot of melanin, and thus he will have very dark skin. Easy to see. Here's the bigger point, though. Let's say dad contributes capital A, capital B, and mom contributes little a and little b. Well, the child's skin will be middle brown shade, the combination of capital A, little a, and capital B, little b, which, by the way, represents a majority of the world's population. Not only that, but if each parent is capital A, capital B, little b, the combinations that could be produced in their children could result in a very wide range of skin shades in just one generation. Ooh. So, since Adam and Eve were the first people ever, it makes sense to conclude that God placed in them a combination of genes that could produce all different shades of skin we see. Those same combinations would be present in Noah and the 7 other people who boarded the ark. And because God dispersed people at the Tower of Babel, he dispersed the population, thereby isolating gene pools in the different people groups. Over time, different cultures formed in different locations with certain features like skin shade becoming predominant. And here we are today. And since we all go back to Noah and his family, it makes sense that we are all different shades of brown. One race, multiple people groups, just like the Bible teaches. Simplified for sure, but enough said.
It's very easy to understand. That's why you find instances like this. These twins were born in Australia. One dark, one light. These twins were born in England. One dark, one light.
There's not this big, huge difference in any of the races of humans. We are all human beings, period.
Yeah.
They don't have, it's just different genetics. And then, after the separation, after the populations grew and people started migrating away, and then the ocean levels rose and it kind of separated peoples. That's why we have the Asians, the whites,
right.
the blacks, because the dominant genes are what caused that group of people to look the way they do. And it's just because of dominant genes. You can find families of people, like specifically like black families, where you can have some of the people in that black family actually have lighter skin than a white person might. There's just, it's just genes. Yeah. That's all it is. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but if you know anything about DNA, it's the parent has all of the DNA that you can get, period. If your parent doesn't have a certain type of DNA, you can't have that, because it's inherited by your parent. Mm-hmm. So, like, if to make it super, super simple, all of DNA contains X, Y, Z, large and small. So this is an extreme simplification of DNA. X, little x, Y, Z, little z. So the parents can have any mix, right? Because as long as your parent has all 6 of those, you can have any of them or not some of them, right? It's just what's passed on to you from your parent.
So you could have like me and Annie are sisters, full blood sisters. So she could have more of one genetic.
Exactly.
Like my DNA stuff is half French.
Well, hers might not show that in testing.
She might be more Irish. She might have, even though she's got French blood.
If your parents all have all of these, you could have this, and she could have this.
You can have a mixture of them.
Right.
So even
you
though
could
we're
have
sisters,
any combination of those. Now, if you have this, you can never have a child that has the big X or the little Z. Unless you marry someone and have a child with them that has the big X or the little Z, and then they can. Otherwise, they're gone. Those genes are gone from that strain, from that DNA strand. And your children can never, unless it's mixed back in by someone else. So that's a very, very extreme simplification of DNA.
So I wonder,
but that's really the truth of it.
I wonder, like with Jody, Jody has 2 children, and I wonder if, say she's full blood French, if one of her children, not both of those children can be half French. I mean, I'm saying one could be half French, and then the other one could have more of their dad's.
True. Yeah.
See, I always thought
that's how genetics work.
I was this, my sister and brother were the same.
You don't have to be exactly the same as your parents, right?
You just have to have some of the parents.
You can only have what they had.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Huh.
So that's a super extreme simplification, but that really is the truth of it. It's really that simple, that it's just the genetics that are passed down. And when peoples migrated, the dominant genes became, they no longer had some of the genes from some of the other races. So the dominant genes is what stayed there. And they were never mixed in from another race. And especially Asian countries, especially like China, they've been isolated from the rest of the world by the mountain chain that keeps them isolated from Europe and Russia. And so they've had a very, their genes have not been tainted much by any other race coming into that area for a long, long time.
Like North Korea.
Well, like the Koreas, right? Yeah.
Yep, North Korea. I mean, they're shut off from the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's that whole part of the world was kind of isolated.
Mm-hmm.
They've had boats and things for a long time, but travel wasn't, you couldn't get to China back in the day without having a very terrible journey trying to get there. And then, back in the day, they probably would have killed you when you got there anyway. So. They didn't like outsiders. So there's a lot of stuff that I've written in here about the theory of evolution that I'll invite you to read it yourself. I'm not going to just read it on the live stream, but go to my website and check it out if you want. Chapter 28.
Do you have a picture of Lucy?
I don't, and I should get one because you're not the first person that's asked that. I should get a picture of the bones and put them on here, but it's not even the same animal, which it's so ridiculous. So, and then what happened to the water, right? We talked a little bit about the size of the ark and how, it's impossible to get every kind of animal onto an ark, right? It was big. If you look at it, it was a huge structure. What was it? It was big enough to hold 530 railroad cars, and they put 250 sheep in a railroad car. So that's 132,500 sheep-sized animals that they could have gotten on the ark.
Yeah, that's a lot of animals.
And God didn't need every single type of animal. He only needed each kind
one
of
dog,
animal.
one cat.
Right, that had all of the DNA.
Not like
So
one
that when-
Doberman and one Chihuahua.
Right. They just needed every kind of animal. And
at that
did the
time,
rest
they
of the
didn't
work.
have a big variety of cats.
That's
and
true.
dogs.
That's true. I think they're all.
Even now, they've got a lot of different kinds
Like
of
the hairless
deer.
Well, they've been doing a lot of cross breeding and things these days. Yeah. But that's all
They're not
God
evolution.
needed.
They're
And it
not-
actually says that in Genesis 8, every beast, every creeping thing, every fowl, whatsoever creepeth on the earth after their kinds went forth out of the ark. He just needed one of every kind. And it's actually, he took two of every kind, right? The male and the female.
Yeah.
And then some, he actually took 7 pairs of certain kinds of animals. Yeah.
But we don't know what kind.
Yeah, it actually tells us. I just didn't note it here. But it does tell us the different types of animals that he
See,
took
and I
7
should know
of.
that, right? If I've read through the Bible 4 times, I should
but that's
know
the thing.
all that.
That's why we have to continually read the Bible.
Right, because we
you can't
miss
remember
stuff.
everything it says.
Yeah, we miss
There's
stuff.
over about 1 million words in the Bible. You're trying to remember it all in 1, 2, 3, even 4 readings.
Like
Yeah.
Annie's like, I never knew that.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I've read the Bible
I
so
know.
many times I've lost count. But
When
there's
did
still
that
stuff
happen?
that I have to go look up. I can't remember everything.
Yeah.
But I showed you that picture before. The Earth was a much different place before or immediately after the flood. And all the continents were connected. And then I like to point this out too. Some people say it was a local flood, but the Bible says that the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth. All the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. The mountains were covered. The entire earth was flooded.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a local flood. And if it was just a local flood, why didn't Noah just move away? He had 100 years.
I know.
Could have just moved to where the flood wasn't going to be.
I know.
He didn't have to build a boat.
That makes sense.
Okay, looks like I'm moving out of town.
Yeah. There's this
It's
rain
people
thing.
try to come up with these arguments against the Bible, but it doesn't cut the mustard. And then, well, how did they take enough food for everything? Well, God had Noah bring food onto the ark for all the animals. And here's the thing. Remember the 2 times in Matthew 14 and Matthew 15 where Jesus fed thousands of people with just like a couple loaves of bread and a fish?
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
So God simply kept that food, took the food that they brought and made it last for the whole year that the flood lasted.
Mm-hmm.
God can do anything.
He can provide.
It's not that hard. There's nothing too hard for God. Otherwise, yeah, it would have been impossible if it was just up to man. And Noah was trying to bring enough food for all those animals, it just wouldn't have worked.
And sorry, I'm not going to spend my time worshiping a God who has limits.
Yeah, can't do that. Yeah, right. And then what happened to the water? Well, here's the thing about when we look at the earth, if you know about the trench at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean is actually 7 miles deep. 7 miles deep. This trench at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. God, he caused the land to lower, and he brought the mountains up, which is what it says. It covered us the deep of the garment. The water stood above the mountains. At thy rebuke they fled. At the voice of thy thunder they hasted away. They go up by the mountains. They go down by the valleys into the place which thou hast founded for them. God sunk down the floors, which are now the bottom of the oceans.
Yeah.
And raised up the mountains, which is why we have 70% of the world is covered by water now. It wasn't before the flood. The seas there was probably many more seas and a lot smaller. But it doesn't give us the exact geography of the planet, which would be kind of cool to study if we could.
On May 18, 1980, Mount St. Helens, located 95 miles south of Seattle, Washington, erupted. The eruption was triggered by an earthquake centered beneath the mountain that measured 5.1 on the Richter scale. The lateral blast swept out the north side of Mount St. Helens at 300 miles per hour. With temperatures as high as 660 degrees Fahrenheit and the power of 24 megatons of thermal energy, it snapped 100-year-old trees like toothpicks and stripped them of their bark. Before the famous eruption at Mount St. Helens, scientists were mostly familiar with slow-acting examples of geologic change. But at Mount St. Helens, geologists watched the Earth's surface change quite rapidly. Icebergs were buried in hot avalanche material. They melted and formed badlands in days. Eruptions on May 18 and June 10 produced fine layers in hours. On June 10, mud flows cut zigzag canyons 100 feet deep in soft sand and mud, complete with perpendicular side canyons. Canyons that are reminiscent of the geography of Grand Canyon, only 40 times smaller and clearly produced within hours. Mud flows over the following decade cut hundreds of feet into solid rock in just days of cutting time. Fallen trees formed a log mat on the surface of Spirit Lake and dropped bark to the bottom of the lake, accumulating up to 3 feet of bark peat in just a couple years. And vertically floating logs sinking to the bottom of the lake resulted in buried trees in only a decade, similar to the trees of Yellowstone's fossil forest, which are also buried in volcanic layers. Even though Mount St. Helens is a very small catastrophe compared to the flood or the major catastrophes immediately following the flood, it provides a better clue to what happened in those times than the slow geologic processes which are most commonly seen in the present.
It doesn't take millions of years to form canyons, to form layers. And as well as that, I want you to watch this short video here that helps us understand more about the canyon aspect.
The Earth's surface is scarred by deep canyons, cut into solid rock. But how did they form? A little bit of water over a long time, or a little bit of time with a lot of water. Modern rivers don't generally cut downward into solid rock, so today's river erosion seems incapable of explaining rock canyons. The Great Flood of the Bible, however, provides a possible explanation for such canyons. In soft mud or sand in your own backyard, you can see the power of heavy rains on a small scale. A rainstorm can create miniature canyons in only minutes. Though these canyons are very small, cut into mud, they share many of the same characteristics as the world's great canyons. On a larger scale, mud flows have also been observed to form these features quickly. At Mount St. Helens, a single mud flow off the mountain carved Engineer's Canyon out of soft sediment in a single day, 100 feet deep. And the same thing even happened in solid rock. A series of mud flows created Lewitt and Step canyons on the front face of Mount St. Helens, cutting hundreds of feet into solid rock over just a few years. We observe canyons being cut into rock today, but only by catastrophic processes. Just imagine how easy it would be to cut massive canyons during and after Noah's flood. Torrential water and mud flows, followed by uplift and heavy rains, created the right conditions to produce the world's canyons. Furthermore, it may have been easier when flood sediments had not fully hardened. Grand Canyon is a good example where we find evidence of catastrophic forces at work. Upstream is evidence of huge lakes. These lakes would never have formed if the canyon were already open below them. However, if these lakes had formed from rains after Noah's flood, and if the pressure of these waters broke through and carved through the recently deposited sediments, then we would expect to find surge deposits downstream. Below Grand Canyon, this is precisely what we find. Evidence of a lot of water cutting over a little bit of time.
So, and then the seafloor sank. This is the Eldridge Moore is a prominent geologist. Is not a Christian, doesn't have anything to do with God. But in his scientific studies, he discovered that the seafloor sank when the planet was covered by water at some point. Well, that's exactly what happened. Even today, the land in the regions that get flooded, like by the Amazon River, it lowers that land every year as it floods. It still continues to cause the land of the region to sink. And that's just it's another thing that's just a very simple explanation to a lot of the questions that people bring up. What happened to the water? 7-mile deep chasm at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. That's where a lot of it is. And then, Genesis 8:3, at the end of the flood, most people think the flood was 40 days. It rained in a torrential downpour for 40 days. The flood actually lasted a year before the waters receded. And the waters returned off the earth continually. And after the end of 150 days, the waters were abated. Now, this is 150 days, a section of it. When you go read the account in Genesis 6, 7, and 8, you'll see that it was actually a year, a total amount of time before the waters were abated off of the earth. And then things like this, where this is a vertical wall, rock wall, and it has footprints running across it. This is a guy standing. This is a vertical, this is a rock wall. This is the face of a rock that's vertical, and there's footprints running across it. And the reason for that, well, it's like dinosaur footprints or animal footprints.
Oh yeah, that guy's really small.
Yeah, and the reason for that is because when all of this happened, the Earth's crust was just transformed greatly. Earth was just folded over. Rock walls were stood up. Because as it turned to rock, and then the Earth was still moving, it just raised up. And that's why we have things like this, where it's totally unexplainable if you try to say that this rock wall was created over millions of years, then how did you get footprints running across a vertical surface like that? It's impossible. Science can't explain these things. The flood of Genesis explains it all.
You just have to have faith.
Yeah. And it doesn't even really require that much faith.
Something like that is really crazy.
And then I like to include this because this is a tectonic map of all of the broken crust where all of the volcanoes and earthquakes happen, where this is, it's at the bottom of the oceans, and then certain mountain chains. That's where the crust before the flood, that's where everything was changed dramatically. And that's where we're at now.
Is this Florida?
Yes. Yeah, this is a map of the world. And it's really interesting, and that's, God said when we get towards the last day, one of the signs of his coming would be earthquakes in diverse places, all of these things. And
There's an earthquake in Georgia.
I just want to show everybody this graph that I have here. In the last 100 years, that earthquakes have quadrupled. They're getting stronger and more frequent. And they're all over the world. There's earthquakes happening in diverse places, which is exactly what Jesus said would happen, that there would be earthquakes in diverse places. There's everything that Jesus said would be happening is happening. He said what herald is coming.
Yeah, and everybody thinks that the earthquakes are just in like the western side. But when I heard there was an earthquake in Georgia, a couple years ago, or last year or whatever.
Last year,
in Georgia, which is right.
Yeah, you never hear of that on the East Coast.
I was watching
a
documentary where they were showing tsunamis and stuff because there
earthquakes
are
under the water.
there's plates under the ocean.
Yeah.
So
and
science
that's what causes
going
tsunamis. It's just an earthquake under the sea.
Yeah. Right. And they're having tsunamis in different places.
Yeah.
So I mean there's so much evidence. Everything Jesus said would herald his coming is happening right now. And it's all we have to do is just look at the facts, look at the evidence.
Yeah.
And exactly what he said is happening. So a couple things on why men believe in evolution. We've talked about this, right? It's because they don't want to believe in God. But even Antony Flew, he's like the most famous atheist ever, right? He debated in Oxford in the 50s. He promoted atheism. He has, these books that he wrote, like the most famous one, The Presumption of Atheism, right? He was a very successful atheist. And he wrote 10 books against belief in God, a lot of other works. But here's the thing. He, at the end of his life, he was 81 years old, he said that there had to be some intelligence behind it all.
And who is he?
Antony Flew.
Is he the guy that was in the wheelchair?
No,
that's
that's a scientist. I don't remember. I can't remember his name.
Oh.
I bet you a pessimistic optimist is writing it down right now.
Okay,
I can't remember his name.
Pessimistic.
But I know what you're talking
if you're
about.
still on, who was
the guy in
the
the
scientist in the
But
wheelchair?
But Antony Flew was
an atheist.
a very successful atheist. And he, at the end of his life, said, what I think the DNA material has done is show that intelligence must have been involved in getting these extraordinarily diverse elements together. The enormous complexity by which the results were achieved looked to me like the work of intelligence. Stephen Hawking.
Stephen Hawking.
Yeah, as soon as he said his first name.
Oh, Hawkins. Yeah. Hawkins.
It's Hawking.
Stephen Hawking. Oh, Hawking.
Stephen Hawking, I think is what his name is.
Wait, Hawking. Hold on.
But
we know you would know it.
this most famous atheist, when he's an old man, finally concedes that there has to be.
Yeah, it's Stephen Hawking.
There has to be.
Thank you, dear.
Yes, thank you. There had to be some intelligence, he says, right? Yeah. Just like we studied before, irreducible complexity, right? Modern science has shown that the Darwin theories are actually impossible because modern science can see things they didn't see back in the 1850s or the 1800s, sorry, not the 1850s. But like the flagellum, which we already looked at. I mean, there's so many things. And then there's a lot of people, especially people that are into philosophy, know about Aldous Huxley. He's a very famous philosopher. And I'm not going to read this whole quote, but basically he says that we want to believe in evolution because that gives us, we have an out for everything. We don't have to believe that anything has meaning. Nothing matters. There's no such thing as morals. It's all made up. And mainly because it justified our erotic revolt. We could do anything we wanted and it was okay. Because
we live,
what does it matter?
We live by our own standards, or people, they live by their own standards, and you don't know what their standards are, so you don't expect anything more from them.
Right. And that's the whole thing that evolution does, is it takes meaning out of everything. It's all pointless. It's all just an accident anyway, so what does anything matter? Right?
Some are wondering, so what are the responses? Like, these seem so compelling, your arguments. Someone wrote in, it seems like it takes more faith to believe in the multiverse than others. What do you think's going on there? Why is there pushback against...
Well, I think there are three reasons why people shun the truth. And when I say shun, you guys even use that word anymore? I'm going to tweak it a little bit. The first one is rational. See how I cheated on that? So people will say, I don't think there's enough evidence for this, and they have a rational objection. And if that's the case, we'll talk about the evidence. But people will say they have a rational objection when they really don't. They have an objection in one of the other two categories. The second category is emotional. Got it? Emotional objections. My dad was a Christian, and he was a jerk. And I've known a lot of Christians, they are jerks. They're such hypocrites. Okay, well, it doesn't sound like you even know what the evidence is for this or isn't. You don't really care. You just don't like the people you know who are Christians. That's an emotional response. That's not about evidence. So I could spend a lot of time talking about the evidence, but if your objections are emotional, I'm not sure how far that's going to go, right? The third category, I think, is the biggest category. And it really isn't a matter of rational or emotional objections. They are volitional objections. I don't want it to be true because I like my life the way it is right now. And I don't say nothing's broken. Why do I need to fix it? And that was me for a lot of years. That's my dad today, is that he doesn't have a bad experience with Christians. He's had nothing but good experience with Christians. But he doesn't want to change his life. And you know, the difference between us as Christians and our friends who are not believers, don't believe in God, is that they are really their own God. Is that if you get to decide freely what is right and wrong, I mean, it's really hard to be a hypocrite when I hold to my private standard that is personal. Because you wouldn't even know if I'm violating my standard, right? And it's a private, personal standard. For all you know, this is how I think the world should be. You and I, though, are going to be called hypocrites before anybody else because we don't just hold to our private, personal standard, which could change day to day. We hold to an unchanging, eternal, public standard that they all know. So when you mess up, they all know you mess up because they know the standard that you claim to follow. It's public, and it doesn't change. So who's going to be called a hypocrite first? Us, of course. Anyone who holds to the unchanging public standard, they're going to be called the hypocrite first. So just be ready for that. That's, of course, what's going to happen, right? And that's a lot of the reason why I think I resisted for so many years. It is easier to hold to my private changing standard. Nobody's going to, how are you doing today, Jim? Great. How do I know? Just ask me. I'm the standard. And I have not violated my personal standards. I have personal standards on this issue. I do not violate my personal standard. What does that tell you? Zero. Because you don't know what my personal standards are, and I could change those tomorrow. They would still be my personal standards. Follow me? And that's where I think a lot of people are, is that you want me to abandon something that is driving culture today. It's one word. It's called autonomy. As we are in a culture that wants autonomy. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what to think. Don't tell me who I am. I'll tell you who I am. I want complete autonomy. Make sense? Yet we are, if we're Christians, we're going to have to surrender our autonomy to the Word of God. And then that's a much bigger ask, I think. So I would find ways to maneuver around the evidence because I wanted to hold on to my autonomy.
And that's what he says, he ends justifying ourselves in our political and erotic revolt. We could deny that the world had any meaning whatsoever.
Yeah,
we just believe in evolution. There's no meaning behind any of it. And in fact, whatever we do is just part of evolution. It's just going to change because it's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, we have no accountability. We don't answer to anything or anyone. And we just have our
Nature
own
just
lives.
made me the way I am.
All I got to say is good luck with that.
I know, right? So, no meaning, no morals, no reason for guilt. Ooh, who wants
no
to
one
feel
feel guilt.
But God said that everything made by Him knows of Him.
That's right.
And even when I was an atheist, I wouldn't have admitted it then, but I do now. That even when I was an atheist and trying to deny God with every cell in my being, I always knew. I always knew deep down. I just denied it, shoved it away, ignored it, tried to argue my way out of it. Yeah, but I knew.
Well, I'm sure glad
And
you
then-
believe in God now.
Well, I love God now.
Yeah.
I thank Him for saving me for 30 years and allowing me the time to come to Him. Yeah. That's what I'm grateful for. But, and then, what is going on in the world right now? Here's a really good quote from Dr. Lynn Margulis. He was a knowledgeable member of the establishment, right? Basically a scientist who is prominent. Says, more and more, today's universities and professional societies guard their knowledge. Collusively, the university biology curriculum, the textbook publishers, the National Science Foundation review committees, the graduate record examiners, and the various microbiological, evolutionary, and zoological societies map out domains of the known and knowable. They decide what can be known and what can't be known. They distinguish required from forbidden knowledge, subtly punishing the trespassers with rejection and oblivion. They award the faithful liturgists by granting degrees and dispersing funds and fellowships, while the people that don't follow their rules get shoved out. And that's exactly what they do. This is a person who's involved in all of that, writing about it. And that's, huh?
It's sad.
It is.
It is sad.
Yeah, because you got to do it our way, or you're out. Sorry, they don't want to believe in God. And this is a good one. Even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such a hypothesis is excluded because it is not naturalistic. So even if all the data says that there had to been something behind this, we're just going to exclude that hypothesis because it doesn't go along with our narrative. Sound familiar to anyone?
Yeah.
The recent
That's
science
what's going on
that's going
in
on?
colleges. In colleges.
Yeah. 1 second, please.
Where'd Annie go?
I don't know. She put herself on mute, and it's probably her landlord or something.
Maybe. Or maybe she went to the little girl's room.
So I know it's 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
I'm going to wrap this up. But this is the whole thing. Your worldview, your attitude is everything. Our worldview is what guides us. And if we believe in evolution and we believe there's no accountability for anything, then we have people like Hitler, Karl Marx, Jeffrey Dahmer. All these people believed in evolution. If you look at all the violence today, these people, it's a mental health problem. These people don't believe in anything. They don't think anything matters. You know, what does it matter? If we're just an accident, what does it matter, right?
No.
It's a very sad thing. And that's why, you know, God said, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. That's the world today, basically. Got some admissions from people. Nature magazine, June 2005, scientists behaving badly. Because falsification, fabrication, plagiarism, you know, all kinds of just not science. They're not doing their job. They're saying things they're actually lying about things so that they can, you know, make their narrative seem true. This is a good one. Evolution is a fairy tale for grown-ups. The theory has helped nothing in the progress of science. It is useless. Louis Bonheur, director of Strasbourg Zoological Museum. Yeah. It's a fairy tale for grown-ups. I like that because that really does kind of sum it up. And scientists are becoming more and more atheist all the time. So they're pushing this evolution narrative because they don't want to believe in God. And here's something that I thought of this at some point a few years ago, and I had to put it in here because it's like, if natural selection means that the best evolutionary form of a species is the one that survives, right? So if natural selection is true, and about 8% of the world is atheist, and another 5% are non-religious, but believe in some kind of universal spirit or higher power, then natural selection is telling us that we should believe in God. Because 92% of the world believes in God.
That's right.
Whether it's Jesus or another
majority.
God.
It's the majority.
Yeah. So those who believe in natural selection and don't believe in God are those who natural selection will kill off.
That's funny.
It is kind of funny.
Oh boy. So if you just wait around long enough, they'll be gone.
Please think about it. For people who don't believe in God or they don't believe in the truth about God, life is pretty bleak. You know, I just one day started thinking about how these people that are being arrested for murder, they're not living their lives for God and stuff. They're acting the way they are because they're hopeless.
Right. There is no hope.
I was thinking about the same thing today with my situation. I'm like, how can they just go on existing without God? Especially, it's like now that's my center, you know, the center of my being.
Yes.
You know?
If you don't believe in God and you don't live for God, you have no hope. So who cares if you go out and kill somebody? So what?
There's no accountability.
And for us, and I just kept thinking, wow, I have something to look forward to. It's not like I'm just going to die and disintegrate.
Yeah, we have hope.
What's the point in having a life if all you got to die for is nothing?
I know.
I want to know that this hell on earth is going to pay off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
I'm going to actually read this scripture.
That's a very good point.
It's really so good.
Well, those who love God, this is the worst things will ever be.
I believe this scripture because this just says it, right? God said, He said, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them. For God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse."
Yeah.
Everything made by God knows of God.
Him. And there's not going to be any excuse.
Yeah. Yeah, because when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, to change the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things.
Yeah, it says it right there.
Yeah. Everything made by God knows of God, and there is no excuse.
Yeah.
And just like I said, I seriously, for 30 years of my life, I was an atheist. I thought I was kind of an agnostic atheist, you know. I thought, well, maybe there's some higher power, maybe there's something, you know, but I pretty much denied that there was a God. And I tried to make evolution work. I tried to make it all fit in my mind, and I imagined all kinds of scenarios and how it could have worked and what could have happened, and you know, all these ideas.
Yeah.
But I struggled with it a lot because anyone with half a brain, and if I'm insulting you, I'm sorry, but I was there, and I'm talking about myself. Anyone with half a brain that looks at the facts can't believe in evolution. You can try like I did. You can try to make it work, but it doesn't. It's impossible. If you really pay attention to the facts.
I always believed in God.
Yeah, I know you did. I didn't. I was raised in a church, and then I decided it was all just a fallacy. I decided that it was made up by men to control other men. That religion just was something that thousands of years ago, somebody invented as a way to control people, and it worked really well. So
and that's such a standard.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people
excuse.
Believe.
It's a standard excuse for everybody. It's a made up control.
It's a control mechanism. But even when I was saying those words, I knew. I always knew deep down. And I'm telling you, every single person out there, you know. You do know. You can deny it all you want, but you do know.
That's right. And if you don't, good luck.
Yeah, just keep denying it because
you're not fooling God.
What?
Yeah.
I said, you're not fooling God. You're only fooling yourself. You're fooling your family members, maybe.
Yeah.
But you're not fooling God.
Yep.
Yeah, and you will meet God someday.
Yeah. The Bible says they won't have an excuse. He's not going to say, so how come you didn't believe? He's going to be, I don't care.
Everything. That's what he said. There's no excuse. Everything made by himself. He ingrained that in his creation.
Yeah.
He incorporated that in our being. So we're a little over time.
Okay, but Pessimistic has something to say. He says, I don't mean to go off on a tangent, but it relates to me trying to visualize Earth, planet, sky at the time when the canopy was destroyed. Earth, flat, round, concave. No judgment. I read a lot.
And that's the thing is, if you go back and look at what the Bible says about the layers, the firmament, and look at and seriously look at some of the evidence, like some of the like the tree sap, the fossilized tree sap having higher oxygen content and everything, in the creation, the earth was perfect. When God finished creation, it was very good.
Mm-hmm. He says that.
It was perfect. And man, it's like I said, I don't remember when, a week or so ago, everybody says, well, death is just part of life.
Oh, yeah.
I disagree. That's why it's so hard for us to deal with death. It's so hard for us to comprehend it. It's so hard for us to grapple with it when somebody we love dies. Because death is not part of life. Death is a consequence of sin and wickedness. We were created to live forever. We weren't created to die.
Yeah.
And that's why it's really hard for us to deal with, because it is not part of life. It's something we all have to deal with, and we all tell ourselves that it's just part of life. It's just what happens. But when we understand why, it changes our outlook. It changes everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to call it a day.
Yeah. Please keep my hubby right here in your prayers, because he hurt his back, and I think it was because he was trying to kill a bee at the pool.
Yeah, the silliest thing, I'm
seriously.
The silliest thing, I bent over to get a bee out of the pool and hurt my back.
Yeah. He tried
I'm
to kill it
60
with my
years
flip
old.
flop.
It just happens.
Give me my chiropractor's number.
I said that to him too. I said, hey, you want to go see Jody's chiropractor?
Mm-hmm. No, I did the chiropractor thing years ago, and I discovered that if I just stayed away from the chiropractor, I felt a lot better. So I don't go anymore. It got so that if I didn't go in my regular visits, I started feeling like I needed to go.
Yeah.
But then when I just stopped going, I just felt a lot better, and I don't hurt my back near as much or anything. So
YouTube,
all I got to do is
Pessimistic.
stretch.
So happy you showed up in chat, and we hope that you can be with us on Wednesday, because are we going to do the Trinity? You said you were going to talk about the Trinity.
We're going to talk about
and that was what you wanted to
Trinity
talk about.
in that doctrine. Yeah.
Next Wednesday, so I hope
and
you
then
come
next
back.
Sunday, we're going to talk about the rapture. We're going to go through
next Sunday.
What the Bible says about the gathering of the saints and exactly when it's going to happen, because God actually told us exactly when it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And all we need to do is read it and believe it. So we're going to talk about that Sunday. We're going to talk about the Trinity
And
on
we
Wednesday.
need Pessimistic back here, because if we have questions, we can say, hey, Pessimistic, what's the answer to this? Good.
That's right. So let's pray real quick, and we'll say goodbye to the live stream. Thank you, Lord, for preserving your truth, for telling us literally everything, Lord. That we're grateful. Help us to anyone who doesn't know you that's listening to this, Lord, just touch their heart. Call them, Lord. Prick them a little bit so that they maybe just want to look into it. Lead them to you, Lord, in your name. Amen.
Thank you so much, everybody, for showing up.
Thanks for coming.
Lord's
it was
willing.
real. It was
fun. He said, I'll be there, Lord willing. Well, we'll be praying for you this week, Pessimistic.
We enjoy your company.
You interact in the chat, and we really appreciate that. Anybody looking in, they'll look at your comments, and hopefully they'll gain something from it.
Unfortunately, doing this on StreamYard, that most of the comments don't show up on YouTube.
Even on YouTube?
Yeah, they don't show up there. They like poof into the nether and they're gone. So I don't know why. That's the way it works.
Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of weird, but.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're going to go, and we just want to say that if you have not subscribed to the channel, please do give it a big thumbs up, and please turn on your notification bell so that you know what's happening, what's going on. So you won't use.
Because by default, YouTube will not notify you. You have to click the bell and you have to select get all notifications, or you won't get any.
Right. And then share it with all your peeps.
And if you think what I'm saying here is true, then share it with other people so that we can reach more people with the truth.
Yeah, maybe there's a family member that is wondering about evolution versus creation, and you'd say, oh yeah, well, I got some videos you can watch.
Yeah, the last 3 weeks we've gone through that whole series on evolution versus creation. Basically proven that the Bible is true when it comes to the flood, and all the scientific evidence proves it.
Yeah. So have a good week. Annie, Jody, peace out, you too. Love you both.
Thanks for
Love
coming.
you and love you.
Night.
Girl number 1, girl number 2. Do the Batman thing.
Love you all.
Same bat place, same bat channel, same bat time, same bat channel, same bat
time. Good enough. Good enough. We shouldn't have put her on the spot. All right. We'll see you guys later. Have a great weekend.
Happy Father's Day, Dan.
Happy Father's Day.
To you too.
Bye.
Bye. Love you.
Bye. Love you.
Love you.